In this video tutorial, we're going to look at Spring MVC RESTful web service that is making use of the JPA, Hibernate and MySQL database to retrieve all the accounts in the MySQL database. So you make a RESTful web service call and it will go to the controller, then controller will make a call to the service layer, and the service layer will make a call to the DAO layer, and the DAO layer will make use of the JPA Hibernate and go to the MySQL database and retrieve all the accounts. So in one of the architectural diagrams here, a typical Java application will be having a HTTP protocol dependent layer. So this is the HTTP layer. This is where we'll be having a Spring MVC. So the Spring MVC RESTful web service call. So you use some kind of a RESTful web service client, and it will be making a network call using HTTP protocol. In this case, we are going to use a RESTful client tool, and we make a RESTful web service call, and it's going to hit the making an HTTP call, and it's going to hit the Spring layer, which is the controller, and the controller is going to get the request and then make a call to the service layer. So the service layer is basically responsible for managing the transactions. It'll be doing some business logic and it'll be making some calculations and so on. And this service layer will be making use of the DAO layer. DAO stands for data access object. The DAO layer is basically to go to some external system via another RESTful web service call or to a database and retrieve the records and then pass it to the service layer, and then service layer might do some calculations or modify some values or whatever, and then pass it back to the controller, and then via the controller it will be going back to the RESTful client, which could be a browser or any REST client tool, or it could be another application trying to get the data, RESTful client trying to get the data from another application. For example, you can have an account service, and will be order service might require another application, order service might require account details, so it will be making a RESTful web service call. The DAO layer here, we're going to look at it, is going to use the JPA, which is the interface, and the JPA implementation is basically Hibernate, and it is going to go to the database. In this case, we are going to use a MySQL database and get the data back. So let's get started. So basically, this one extends the previous tutorial. We looked at JPA, Hibernate, and we made a call from a simple Java main method. Here, instead of that, we're going to extend that to make it as a RESTful web service call. So the first place we start is in the pom.xml file. So everything that I'm going to show in the code is provided in the link below. The code is there. You can copy and paste it, and you can try it yourself. So if you look at the pom.xml file, the first change we made was, before it was used to be a jar file, I had to change it to a WAR, web archive file, because we're going to make a RESTful web service call now, and we're going to deploy this WAR file to Tomcat. And then obviously the 1.8, these are some of the properties say that we want to use the 1.8 version of the Java. And from the servlet 3 onwards, web.xml file is optional. You don't have to have a web.xml file. You can configure your servlet and the URI paths and everything via Java classes. The Spring based is called the web initializer. So we need to tell Maven that not to fail if there is no web.xml file, because we're not going to create a web.xml file here. So that's this one. So this one is basically saying the context we are going to invoke is the simple web. So when we make a call, it's going to be simple web / whatever. So it's a simple web. And then we are saying this war maven plugin that fail on missing web.xml is false. That means if there's no web.xml file, it's not going to fail. So that's what this setting is. So we are customizing the Maven WAR plugin, which creates the WAR file. We have already said the package we are going to create is a WAR. And then the normal dependencies. So we have a JUnit dependencies. We need the MySQL driver to talk to the MySQL database. So Hibernate will be using this MySQL driver. Then definitely we need a connection pool, so we are using the Hibernate C3P0 connection pool. We need the Java persistence API, so this is the Java persistence API. Then we need the Hibernate to be able to persist stuff into the MySQL database. And here we need to exclude this Hibernate JPA 2.1 API because recursively, transitively, Hibernate will bring in this jar. It will conflict with the Java persistence jar that we have added. So we just exclude it here and we use the Java X persistence API jar. Then when we deploy it, we don't need the servlet API because the Tomcat will have the servlet. But in order to compile our code, we need the servlet. That's why we put the scope as compile. So that means it won't be packaged into the WAR file, but it will be required for your classes to compile. Then obviously to do this RESTful Spring Web Service, we need the Spring MVC. So we need the Spring Web MVC. We are bringing that in. And also if we have to serve it as a JSON or XML file, we are using some binding so that your Java POJOs can be automatically unmarshaled and marshaled by Spring into JSON or XML. So we need the Jackson data bind and the Jackson data format XML libraries. These are from the com.fasterxml group ID. So that's all we need for the pom.xml file. So this will be there in the link provided below. So the first step now is we have already looked at the model. So the model account.java is the one which will be having the Hibernate at entity attribute. So that's to show that it is a Hibernate entity and it has to map to a table. The table you're going to look at is called account, and we have all the fields, ID and so on. And definitely you need to have a one attribute ID just to say that this is the identifier. So in this case, ID is the identifier. We're not going to auto generate this, but we will be assigning. If you want to create a new ID or something in the database, then we have to assign when we create this object. The other classes that we need is definitely we need to write a controller. So when we write a controller, so this is where the RESTful web service calls will be coming through. So we are calling it the version 1 is called the forecasting. So in the URI we'll be having version 1 and the forecasting. And then we are making use of the account service. This is the service layer. So we already looked at, we need to look at the service layer here. So this is the presentation here, is the controller that we are looking at. This is the service layer. So the service layer is basically saying anything URI that's coming with the accounts will be passed to these particular methods. This particular method. So different methods, you can have anything, one for saving, one for getting one particular account and so on. So they all will be having different path. So what this is doing, it is basically is calling the account service. So we are injecting this account service via the auto-wired. So auto-wired will be injecting creating an instance of the account service impl, and we will be using the account service. So this account service, all it does is makes another call to the account service DAO. So we'll look at the account service DAO. So this DAO implementation, what it is doing, it'll be making use of the entity manager and the persistence manager instance, and it'll be making a call to the database and getting all the accounts and returning back to the service layer, and the service layer will then return it back to the controller layer. So if you look at the service layer will be just making a call to the DAO. So if you look at the service layer, it is auto-wired and is injecting the DAO. So the controller is depending on the service and the service is depending on the DAO, and we are using auto-wired to inject everything, and we need to use the proper annotation. So at service is annotation for the service layer, and for the account DAO layer we are using at repository, and for the controller layer we are using the REST controller as the annotation. So Spring will manage automatically creating an instance of these classes and then inject into each other. So before these can be injected, it is quite important that you configure this. So in the configuration, I said we don't need a web.xml file if you're using Servlet 3 or later versions. So the way to configure this is, first we need to do a simple web configuration. So here, before we used to say com.mytutorial.controller, here I'm saying automatically component scan and injected with the auto wired annotations anything that are of package com.mytutorial. So you will have anything that are com.mytutorial.deo, com.mytutorial.service, com.mytutorial.controller. All these classes that are in these packages will be auto injected, and Spring will automatically scan them. And also we are saying enable web MVC, so we make it web MVC friendly, and add configuration is saying that this particular class is a configuration class. So now that we have done the component scan and then saying com.mytutorial package, so everything in this controller automatically this will be scanned, because that's in the com.mytutorial sub package within the com.mytutorial. So this rest.controller will be scanned. This account service impl, that at service annotation, will be scanned, and also account deo impl, this repository also will be scanned. And also it is coded to interface, so you have an account deo, it just defines the interface. Same way the account service impl also got account service, which is an interface as well. So now we have defined the web service configuration, and we said we should be able to automatically scan these components. So inside the account controller, we know that account service will be automatically scanned because we said component scan, auto scan set up for that package. And account service will be scanned by the auto wired because the implementation has got at service annotation. If you take this annotation, it won't be scanned. So you've got at service annotation here. And the account deo inside the account service impl will be scanned because we are saying scan everything in the com.mytutorial, and when it scan it, the account deo impl got a at repository annotation, so it will be scanned as well. So basically you don't have to use at repository, we can use an at component annotation as well to scan, but it's always a best practice to use at repository for the deos and at service for the service layer, and at rest controller for the controller layer, or at controller if you are using a web application, web app. So these all basically type of at component scan, so this can be replaced by at component annotation as well. So once you have this scanning thing, somewhere you need to say whatever, this is the servlet that you want to use and what's the URI path to use and so on. So that's also inside this config package, and it's called the simple web initializer. So this simple web initializer will extend the abstract annotation dispatcher servlet initializer, which is a Spring class. And you need to override some of these methods. So basically what this is doing is, it's saying the simple web configuration.class. So we have already looked at that. That's where the scanner and configuration is defined. So it's saying we need to scan for the components and so on. So we need to provide that. And then we need to say this particular dispatcher servlet, which is the Spring uses the front controller pattern. So it's going to assign to a dispatcher servlet. So anything that got a URI of entry / asterisk has to come through this dispatcher servlet, and then it will be going into the controller, and then anything with the V1 forecasting will be coming to this particular account controller, and then once it has got anything that got accounts URI will be getting into this particular function. So now we have looked at the configuration, we have looked at the service. So the service, all it does is basically call the deo class, and then when you go into the deo implementation, it's making use of the Spring Entity Manager instance. So the persistence manager or instance is basically this is a singleton. So if I select on this and press F3, or you can press the control button and click on this, you'll be going to the entity manager. So entity manager is basically a util class. It'll be making use of the JPA example. This JPA example was configured via the persistence.xml file in the source main resources metadata. So if you go to the source main resources, sorry, not metadata, meta-inf, you will see the persistence.xml file. So this persistent.xml file, as we saw earlier, is specifying the URL, how we can connect to the database. So here we are using the URL to jdbc:/mysql. If you are using Oracle, it will be different. If you are using Sybase, it will be like different. So in this case, it's MySQL. So we are calling it jdbc:/mysql. I'm running in my local machine, so it's a local host, and the port in which the server is running is 3306, and the database is called the Learn Java DB. And then we need to provide the user123, which is a user ID, password pwd123, which is the password, and obviously we need to provide the driver class name. So this is the driver that we are going to use. It's a MySQL driver, and this will be in the jar file that we have already included via the pom.xml file, which is the MySQL driver jar, and it will be looking for a class inside that package and with this name with driver. And then obviously format SQL is to format show SQL, so that when you run your application, it will show all the SQL commands that Hibernate is generating. It's a good way of debugging your application. And then also you need to tell the Hibernate what dialect to use. So in this case it's MySQL, so it's a MySQL dialect. And these are the connection pool settings. So how many minimum connections to create, what's the maximum number, what is the timeout, and so on. So now that we have seen these parameters here, so let's go to the DOS thing console and start the MySQL database server. So here I'm going to start it with mysqld, which is the daemon -- console. So this is going to start the server, and you can see the server has started and it is listening on port number 3306. Now let's create a small client. Let's start a client so that connects to the server, and you can do select queries and so on. And also you can see what the database is and what the account class that we are using. So I'm going to open another thing here. You're going to script, and here we're going to connect it as a client. So here we got to say MySQL. The user, we have already set it up in one of the previous tutorial in setting up the MySQL database as user123, and the password is P, and then it'll ask you for the password and you enter pwd123, and now you're in a MySQL mode. So these are the parameters we have specified here also. So this is the localhost 3306, user is 123, and password is pwd123. Now here, if you have to see what databases we are having, we can say show databases, and one of them is the Learn Java DB. So these all came with the MySQL package. When you install it, this is our default. And Learn Java DB is the one we created in the tutorials that focused on setting up MySQL database. So this Learn Java DB is what we're going to use, and this is where we're going to have a table called account. So to switch to this database, I say use Learn Java DB semicolon. And now the database is changed. Now we have switched to this Learn Java database, and a database can have multiple tables. So in this case, I have only created one table, and this is a table that we'll be reading all the way from RESTful web service. So to see what are the tables here, you can say show tables. So it shows you only one account table, and if you want to describe what the structure of this table is, I do describe table, it is called describe the table name, which is account. So then we got ID, name, and balance is a float. Balance is a float, name is a varchar 50, ID is a varchar 30. Now if you want to see what's already in the database, you do select star from account. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 records here. We got multiple records here. So as part of the previous record, we created this duplicate 234 Simon 356 amount. So we got 6 records now. Now we're going to use a RESTful web service to access this. So now we have looked at all these. So we got an account controller. That's anything with accounts is going to make a RESTful web service call, and it's going to retrieve the accounts via the service layer, DAO layer, and then hibernate and to the database and then back. So to test this RESTful web service client, what we are going to use is a RESTful client tool. So it's a vistools.org REST client. We showed how to install this in the Spring MVC tutorial. So this is basically a combination of two tutorials. One is the simple Spring for MVC RESTful web service. So if you look at this tutorial, I have showed how to install this REST client, and you can use this REST client to test all your GET, POST, and all type of different RESTful web service calls. So since we have already installed this, now I'm going to do it is start this client. So to start this client, basically I'm going to copy this, Control C, and I'm going to go to my tools and paste this and click on it. So this is the jar. So REST client UI32 jar with dependencies. So this is the jar you need to run. So I click on it and my REST client will start. So now the REST client has started. So basically what you can do is you can put different URIs and you can directly hit the URI. So here what I'm doing is localhost. Obviously I'm running on this local machine. 8080 is where my Tomcat is running, and simple web is the initial context, web context, and entry is where which we configured in the one of the web configuration file, and version 1 forecasting is the controller, and then accounts is basically the methods at path. But before I can hit this, I need to deploy my application. I got to package it as a WAR file. I got to deploy it into Tomcat. So if I hit this, it's not going to work because we don't have Tomcat running. So it's going to try it for a while and it's going to come with the error connection refused. Obviously that port, Tomcat is not running in that particular 8080 port for it to be able to connect. So I say okay here. So I go back to my Eclipse and I'm going to right click on my simple ORM persistent. So now it's basically the previous tutorial extended with all the RESTful web service and Spring MVC classes. So I'm going to say run as Maven install. So you can see this is building it here. So Maven is running. Maven is building the WAR file. And this WAR file will be there in this target folder. So if you go and look at the WAR file, simpleweb.war, because we said in the pom.xml file to build the package as simpleweb.war, so that's why it has built it as simpleweb.war, not as the simple ORM persistence.war. So to recap that, if you go into the pom.xml file here, we call it simple web, so that's why it has built it as simpleweb.war file. And also it didn't complain anything about web.xml file not being there, because we have overridden the war plugin thing and says not to fail when if there is no web.xml file. So now if we inspect the simple.web, all we'll be having is a meta-inf, and also you'll be having the web-inf, and inside the web-inf you will have the lib. The lib will have all the third-party jar libraries. So this is where the Spring for MVC, Web MVC, Spring Core, Spring Beans, all these would have been brought in. So when you add the Spring Web MVC, the Spring would have gone and brought in all the cores, beans, context, everything is required. And also it has brought in the, so you can also see here MySQL connector is there. This is where the driver, so we need the driver to be able to connect to the MySQL database. Then we got Jackson annotations, Jackson core and Jackson data bind. So these all, and data format XML. So this is required to convert your account.java hibernate object to XML. And also the Jackson data bind is also required to convert it to JSON as well. So we got all the required libraries that we defined it via the pom.xml file inside the lib. And then inside the classes is where there will be all the classes that we have created. So if you look at the my tutorial, you got a config package where I got a Spring configuration classes, the initializer and the configuration. Then we got the controller where I got the account controller class. Then DAO, we got the interface and the implementation of the DAO. We got the main, we're not going to use it here, main, the model, the account.class. So this is where we defined the object, the variables, and how it maps to the account table in the database. And we provided the hibernate annotations. And then in the service layer, we got the account service and the account service impl. Even though the service impl in this example is not doing much, you might think why we need an unnecessary layer in the middle. But in a typical industry level applications, you will be retrieving something via the DAO, and then in the service layer you will be providing some logic. So you'll be adding some calculations, you'll be setting some more additional values, or you might be setting some value based on some business logic. So all those business logic need to sit in the service layer. And then obviously we have the util layer. We got the persistence manager that makes use of the persistence.xml file to create an entity manager, which is basically a connection to your database via Hibernate. So in the meta.inf is where the persistent.xml file, where we define what URL to use, what driver, what dialect, and so on, whether to show the SQL or not, all the configuration. So that will be in the persistent.xml file. So we got everything that we developed inside this WAR file now. So basically this is all archived into a web WAR. So I'm going to copy this WAR file and I'm going to open a file browser manager and then copy it into my Tomcat folder. So C tools is where I have installed all the Eclipse Eclipse, Apache Tomcat, Maven. All these are basically tools. So if I go into Apache Tomcat, there's another tool as well. Here we have deployed here. Click on here, then inside the web apps is where I'm going to put it. So I'm going to paste this here. Replace this. Now we got the WAR file copied. Now I got to start the Tomcat. So we're going to go to tools. This is where the Tomcat is installed. Tools, Apache Tomcat 9, Apache Tomcat milestone 21 version, bin and startup.bat. So I press enter. Tomcat is starting and it'll pop up. And I need to keep my eye out for any errors. So if your WAR file has got some errors, because Spring binds all those DAOs, service classes, controller, everything, the dependency injection happens at runtime. So during the compile time, I wouldn't tell you. So now when you run it, if there's any errors that Spring couldn't scan a particular component or a service or whatever, it will complain during runtime. So there's no error here, so looking good. And it's saying the Tomcat is running on port number 8080. So Tomcat is running on port. So now if I go to my VizTools REST client and execute this again, so I'll just explain the URL again. So it's the HTTP protocol. Localhost is I'm running on a local machine. Tomcat is listening on port number 8080. We already seen that 8080 is where Tomcat has started. Then the simple web is coming from the simple web war is the name of the file that we have built. So this is the simple web.war, and we configured the name of the war file via the pom.xml file. So because the context is a simple web war file, so then simple web is the context, then entry is where the dispatcher servlet we have configured. So if you look at the simple web initializer, so we are saying anything with /entry /* is going to come through this particular configuration. So /entry, so we need /entry. So this /entry, the moment it sees the entry, is going to go in here. And then it says anything with v1 forecasting. So v1 forecasting is where in the account controller we are saying it's going to come to this controller, because in a typical project you can have multiple controller, order controller, product controller, they're all providing different RESTful web services. So anything that has got v1 forecasting will be coming into the account controller. Then if you say anything with v1 product might go to another controller, say product controller. Anything with v1 /order might go to another controller called order controller, and so on. So we have configured that. Then what we are going to do is, okay, now we have entered into the class, which the v1 forecasting. Always is good to have the version numbers, because you might make some changes and you might publish it at version 2 or something, or two different clients, one using the version 1 and another one using the version 2. Then we are saying accounts. So what we are saying is that we are doing a HTTP GET method and accounts. We're going to get all the accounts. So in this case, here anything with accounts is going to come to this method. So that's how it comes into this method, and it's saying this request method is an HTTP GET. So once it gets here, it's going to call the account service.get accounts. It's going to go into the account service. Account governance doesn't do much. It knows how to inject the account DAO, and it's going to call the account DAO, and the account DAO is going to make use of the persistence manager, which is the JPA configuration that says Hibernate is the JPA provider, and it's going to do select everything from the account. So this is going to make a call to the database, get all the accounts, and automatically map that to the account object that we provided here, and it is going to return it all the way back to the controller, and then controller is going to return it back to this RESTful client here. So now if I go and click on here, you should go all the way to the database, and it should come back. And if you look at the Tomcat, it will also print here. See, it's making the call. So these are printing the Hibernate, the SQL queries that Hibernate is making, because we have provided show SQL as true in the persistence.xml file. And then it's going to the database and it's going to get the value out. So if you go and look at the body headers, here we go. So we got the XML back. So basically what we have got in this XML is everything that is in the database. So including the 356, 234 ID, Simon, balance 356, so a couple of Simon here. So now by default it has used XML. Now how do you say we need to get the data back as JSON? So here we can say .json. It's going to get the same data back as a JSON. Here we go. Now we got the JSON back. 1, 2, 3, whatever. So depending on how you construct your URI, you will either get XML or JSON. But if you want to get the JSON as the default, even without putting .json, you can go to your controller. We have already covered this in the Spring MVC tutorial. You can go to the controller and then say the data type is going to return. Here we can say whether it's going to be the JSON or it's going to be XML by default. But if you want the flexibility to be able to get as XML or JSON, depending on how you invoke the method. So if you invoke it without the .json, it just accounts, it will return you the XML here shown here. If you want to put .json, it will return you the JSON. So you can now go and implement all the other methods to save something. So you can add another RESTful web service call, and which can call the save account method. But in this case, what we need to do is when we make a call from here, you need to make a call to the post, and we need to post a JSON or an XML. So this post, a get, and all those things were covered in the Spring MVC tutorial. So as an exercise, you can go to this Spring MVC tutorial. At the top you can see a link here, and you can follow it through, and you can implement all the other post. And if you want to get just one account, then in the RESTful web service call, when you make a call here, you got to say what account ID it is. It will go all the way back to the controller. You got to provide a new method to get an ID and then pass the ID to the DAO. You need to have the service, and the service will pass it to the DAO, and you will be doing a select query with where ID equals 1, so it will give you only just one account. So I'll let you practice that, and that's all for this tutorial. So we have seen making a RESTful web service call all the way, and using actual the Hibernate and actual data from the database, and retrieving those data from the database itself. So this is the data that we retrieved. We will see in another tutorial.